You're listening to Soap Dirt, the latest in television entertainment news.
Hey there, Days of Our Lives fans. It is Belynda from Soap Dirt, and we got a little treat for you today. If you watch Peacock daily to see Days of Our Lives first thing in the morning while you're drinking your coffee like I do, you might have noticed a programming glitch on Monday morning. So Monday, August 28th, was the first day of season 59, and the menu program on Peacock wasn't showing season 59 at all. First, they had Friday's episode, Friday the 25th, showing up as the one for Monday the 28th. And then they accidentally put up next Monday's episode, the one dated September 4th, but they yanked it back down later, but not before we saw it, and some other people saw it too, I'm sure. I know everybody didn't see it, especially if you watch it in the evening. All this drama already happened with them putting up the wrong episode. So there are some huge tidbits in this accidentally leaked episode, and we're going to share this with you right now if you didn't get to see it. There was major action for EJ and Xander about revenge and murder. Then there was the leak of the likely identity of the mystery man played by Dick Van Dyke. Ava Vitali got a huge memory recall that will stun EJ. And Theresa Donovan really wants another chance with Brady Black. We're going to tell you all about it. But first, if you haven't already, please reach down, click subscribe so you don't miss any of our day's updates. All right. On Monday, September 4th, you're going to see Harris telling Ava that Marlena agreed to help her. But Ava's like, I just want to forget Susan Banks existed. Ava tells him she hasn't had a vision since yesterday, but then Susan Banks shows up to torment her all over again, and Harris is watching her talk to space, empty space, because of course he can't see or hear Susan. So Susan is still messing with her, and then Ava tells Harris Susan's right there, but then she's gone. And so he asks what she said, and Ava says she wants me to tell the truth. And he's like, I'm going to call Marlena. Meanwhile, EJ is napping on the sofa at the mansion, and he has a dream that his mom walks in the door of the mansion, and he wakes up startled and just on fire. Xander calls Chloe to ask her to dinner. He's leaving her a message about let's talk about wedding plans. He says Philip isn't invited. Love you, ends the message. And then all of a sudden, EJ's at the door with a gun, holding the gun on Xander, and says he's been thinking about how much he misses his mother and how he let her murder go unavenged. Xander agrees it was a terrible tragedy, and he blames Ava for driving Susan off the cliff and says, if anyone deserves to die for this, it's Ava, not me. EJ agrees, flips the gun around, and tries to hand it to Xander and says, go kill her. It's about justice and redemption, he says. And EJ tells him this will make up for what you did to my mother. And then to sweeten the pot, EJ writes down a really high number with a lot of zeros in euros and tells Xander, I'll give you this much also to kill her. And Xander says, I just can't do it. And he tells EJ, look, I've been plagued by horrible nightmares since your mother died. EJ says, me too, but I have to avenge her death. Xander says, I'm sorry, I can't do it. EJ says, my mom can't rest in peace until Ava's dead, and he owes it to Susan. And Xander owes it to Susan to help him. But Xander says no, because he also suspects that EJ is going to have him kill her and then make sure that Xander takes the fall so that he's punished as well. So he tells EJ, beat it. But EJ vows Ava and Xander will both pay. Later in the park, EJ calls someone and orders them to kill Ava Vitali. That doesn't sound good. Theresa Donovan comes to Brady's door, and she's going on about her crazy flight to get there. And he's like, why are you here? And she's like, well, that's not very nice. And she says, I came to pay my respects to Victor, their son's great-grandfather. She says their son's at school, so she came alone for the funeral. Brady says, you didn't even care that much for him. And then we get some flashback scenes of Victor and Teresa, and Victor telling her how proud he was of her, calling her family always, and then they were hugging. She and Brady are laughing about how much Victor hated her big sister Eve. And then Teresa brings up that Xander's the reason she and Brady aren't together now. But Brady's like, that's not the only reason, and brings up her suing him for custody and all her lying. And Teresa says they were good together, had something special. Brady says, yeah, a long time ago. And then basically she grabs him for a passionate kiss and says, we need to give this another try. We're both single. And he's like, we were toxic. No. She's still insisting, but he's like, nope, not doing it ever again. He asks her to leave. She goes. And then afterward, he's thinking back, and they have a flashback to that wedding in the bedroom that she had mentioned. And then Teresa's sitting crying in the park, looking at a picture of them together, and Xander walks up on her in the park. All right. Then we have Marlena at the pub. She's telling John and Patch about the mystery amnesiac she met. That is Dick Van Dyke's character. And she says he was found wandering on the side of the road. She doesn't know who he is. And he says he doesn't know. And John cracks, oh, been there, done that. Of course, if you remember, John has had amnesia as well. I think half of Salem has. Marlena says they're calling him, Mr. Doe. He wants to find his son. He had a dream about his son. And then he talked about memories of a farm, and they wonder if he came from nearby rural areas. John says that's not a lot to go on. Marlena talks about maybe there was fighting going on. John says, oh, maybe he was in a war. So she asks the Black Patch guys to please figure out who their John Doe is and who is his lost son and his identity if they can figure it out. Then they wonder if he served in the military and if his prints are on file. Marlena gets the call from Harris to come out to Bayview, so she scoots out. The guys start working on this ID. They start by calling these rural outlying areas looking for missing persons. They come up dry. Then they wonder if he was ever treated at the VA center. So John calls a VA hospital, asks if a patient went missing, and he hits pay dirt. They head to the VA to see someone whose name is either Mr. Duke or Mr. Dugan, because the pronunciations were both off and the subtitling was being weird at any rate. And he tells them that his name is actually Mr. Bell, Joseph Bell. And he's hoping that he's all right. They say he's okay. And then the guy who runs the VA says that he's had memory loss for decades. He says they tell him his name is Joseph Bell, but he never remembers it for very long. And he was only there for a few weeks, but has been an amnesiac for a long time, for decades, and has bounced from VA center to VA center. So the director says they're not even sure if he really has a son or not, or if that's just some kind of fake memory he's created. And then he leaves them with a file they can look at of his publicly available military records and his dog tags. He leaves to take care of some stuff, and then John and Patch are looking through everything. John skims the file and is completely stunned. He says that Joseph Bell served in the same unit in the Korean War as John Black's own biological father. Dun, dun, dun. You guys can see where this is going. So John says that he gathered info on the unit his dad served in when he was trying to find his biological father. And Patch says maybe they knew each other. All right, just as a quick history lesson, John Black believed until 2008 that he was the love child of Colleen Brady and Santo DiMera. But then he found out later that the child they had, whose name was Ryan, had actually died years before, and that wasn't him. For a long time, John has had no idea of who his biological parents are. He was adopted by the Alamains. All right, so over at the hospital, Julie sits down by Dick Van Dyke in the waiting room, and she says her husband stubbed his toe and wanted an x-ray, and so they keep each other company as they both wait. He's waiting to get a CAT scan done. She's waiting for Doug. So she asks him his name, and he says, well, that's the $1 million question, and he says they're calling him Mr. Doe. And then he says Kayla pointed out this bad scar on the back of his head, and they think he might have had a head injury. And then she starts talking about her Uncle Tommy that had a memory loss from a wound in Korea and had plastic surgery, came home with no clue who he was. And Doe says, that sounds very familiar. And then he says, I wonder if I'm your Uncle Tommy. And she says, you can't be because he died a few years ago. And then he starts talking about this son he's never met, but he feels like he's nearby. He wants to go look for his son, but he's waiting on the CAT scan. And Julie says maybe she can get them to speed things up. And then he keeps wondering why the Korean War sounds so familiar. Julie comes back and she's wheeled Doug over to introduce him to Mr. Doe. And then he suddenly starts talking about a wife he had. He says he can picture her face, but there's no ring on his finger. He can't remember her name. And then Julie explains to Doug that he's got amnesia. And then Doug hilariously says, oh, I know about memory loss because I was possessed by the devil and I didn't remember stuff from that time. And then it's interesting. Julie and Doug and Mr. Doe, they start singing Tea for Two right there in the lobby. Then they're kind of dancing. Julie spinning Doug around in his wheelchair. It's a fun little moment. Because Dick Van Dyke, he was a song and dance man, you guys know. All right, then over at Bayview, we have Marlena talking to Ava about the Susan issue. She wonders if there's something in her subconscious eating at her, and she offers to hypnotize her. Ava's like, sure, let's try it. Doc asks Harris to step out, and he encourages Ava. Then he goes. Marlena hypnotizes her. They start talking about the night of the wreck. Ava says EJ was tailing her, so she sped up. Flashbacks of her and Susan in the car. Susan kept yammering about her lucky hat. Ava tells her to shut up. EJ kept getting closer. She couldn't shake him, and then she kept hallucinating Charlie. He was taunting her. And then we see, again, the car go off the road. Ava says she barely got out in time before it hit. And then she must have gotten knocked out because things just went black in her mind. And Marlena asks about when she woke up. Ava says, I was on the ground, cars in flames. And then that's it. She can't remember anything. So she says, all right, we have a couple of big reveals from the end of this episode. If you're enjoying this little sneak peek at a week ahead episode, click a like, drop your comments, and definitely subscribe if you haven't already. So Marlena is done. Harris shows back up to check on her. Then he walks Marlena out, and she says she wishes she could have helped Ava more. Then Harris comes back, and Ava drops a bombshell and says, I lied to Marlena. I do remember everything. And she says, Susan Banks is alive. So share your comments below, but the takeaways are just the two big takeaways from this episode. It looks like Dick Van Dyke is John Black's biological father that has never been revealed before on Days of Our Lives. John is a perfect choice because he's these mystery roots and a history of amnesia himself, and his biology, his true parents, is a complete blank slate. So yeah, they can plug this guy right into that spot. Also, Susan Banks is alive, but EJ has already contracted Ava's murder since Xander refused to do it. I do wonder if it's going to be Thomas Banks doing the deed. And of course, the last note, Brady rejected Teresa, but it looks like he is having second thoughts. All right. Thank you guys for listening. That is a quick peek at what's coming next week on Days of Our Lives. And thanks to a technical glitch, we got to offer you all these spoilers. Come back soon for more on Days.
Thank you for being a loyal listener. Follow us wherever you get your podcast, because you don't want to miss the next episode. Soap Dirt is on all the major podcast platforms, including Apple Podcast, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and more.